An elderly woman, frail and weak, was shoved and handcuffed by police officers for no apparent reason. But at that very moment, a towering figure emerged from the crowd. It was Shaquille O'Neal, the basketball legend. He didn't just stand by to watch, he decided to intervene. Tensions escalated, words were exchanged, and Shaq stood firm, like a wall of justice. What happened next? Could Shaq's actions turn the situation around? Follow this emotional and dramatic story to find out. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can share more meaningful stories like this one. Let us know where you're watching from. Share in the comments. A soft morning sunlight bathed the busy streets where people bustled about their daily routines. But for Eleanor Jenkins, a 67-year-old woman, everything seemed slower. As an elderly black woman, she had lived in this neighborhood for decades, a place where scrutinizing glances and whispered judgments were an unspoken reality. She was once a dedicated teacher, educating hundreds of children in the community, but her retirement years were far from easy. The neighborhood had changed, and the atmosphere was no longer the same. Sitting on a bench by the street, Eleanor set down her small grocery bag. A loaf of bread, a few apples, and a carton of milk were all she could afford with her modest pension. She took a deep breath, watching people pass by. But the peace was broken when two police officers, Officer Daniels and Officer Barnes, approached her. Daniels, a tall man with a cold stare, was the first to speak. "Ma'am, show us some ID." Eleanor looked up, slightly confused by the commanding tone. "ID? I didn't bring any. I just came out to buy a few things and sit down to rest. Is there a problem?" Barnes, with a sharp and piercing tone, stared her down. "We received a description of a black suspect and you match it. It's best you cooperate unless you want trouble." Those words made Eleanor freeze. Her skin color, something she had learned to accept but never fully escaped the stigma of, was now being used to accuse her. "I'm just an old woman. I haven't done anything wrong," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. But Daniels didn't let her explain. He reached for Eleanor's bag, yanking it away to inspect it. The bag fell to the ground, spilling its contents: the loaf of bread, the apples, and the milk. Daniels bent down to rummage through it as if searching for evidence of a crime. When Eleanor bent down to pick up her belongings, Barnes stepped forward, grabbed her arm, and yanked hard. "Stay still. You're being detained for obstructing an officer." The pull caused Eleanor to lose her balance and fall onto the concrete. The pain from the fall was nothing compared to the humiliation surging through her. "Why me?" she thought, tears welling up. She tried to steady her voice and asked, "What did I do wrong? You can't treat me like this just because I'm black." Daniels looked down at her with a mocking expression. "Don't bring race into this. If you don't want trouble, stay quiet." The scene began to draw the attention of bystanders. Some stopped, murmuring among themselves, but no one dared to step in. A young woman started recording with her phone, while a middle-aged man shook his head and muttered, "It's always like this. They always target us." Across the street, Shaquille "Shaq" O'Neal, the towering figure whose face had graced countless TV screens, was walking back from a community event. He stopped when he noticed the gathering crowd and heard Eleanor's cries. "Why are they doing this to an elderly woman?" Shaq thought, his eyes fixed on the scene. He recognized the situation instantly, something he had witnessed too many times in his life. As a black man who grew up in a poor neighborhood, he understood the pain of being judged solely by appearance or background. Shaq took a deep breath and began striding purposefully toward the crowd. Each step seemed to silence the murmurs around him. People started recognizing him, and whispers spread, "That's Shaquille O'Neal. He's coming over." Shaq stopped in front of Daniels and Barnes, bending down to help Eleanor to her feet. His deep, steady voice resonated as he said, "Are you okay, ma'am? I'm here now. Don't worry." Then he turned to the two officers, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "What's going on here? Why is she being treated like this?" Daniels, not yet realizing who Shaq was, frowned in irritation. "Big guy, this doesn't concern you. If you don't want trouble, you'd better move along." But Shaq didn't budge. With his massive frame, he was like an immovable wall standing between Eleanor and the officers. "I'm not going anywhere. If this is how you enforce justice, then it needs to be reevaluated." The crowd around them grew louder. A woman shouted, "Don't let them take her. This is blatant racism." A young man held his phone higher, capturing every detail up close. Shaq, standing tall and unyielding, wasn't just protecting Eleanor. He was standing up for everyone who had ever been unfairly treated because of the color of their skin. Shaq stood tall, positioning himself firmly between Eleanor and the two officers, Daniels and Barnes. His massive frame was like an unyielding wall, amplifying the tension in the air. Under Shaq's piercing gaze, Daniels felt the pressure but tried to maintain his arrogant demeanor. "Who do you think you are to interfere in this?" Daniels said, his tone sharp to mask his unease. "We're the police. This is our job. Step aside before things get messy." Shaq remained calm, his deep voice resonating with authority. "Your job is to uphold justice, not to threaten and humiliate an innocent elderly woman. I don't know what she's done wrong, but I'm certain that your behavior here is wrong." Daniels took a step forward, raising his hand as if to push Shaq back. "I don't need you teaching me how to do my job. If you keep interfering, I'll arrest you for obstruction." Shaq didn't move. He stared directly at Daniels, his expression firm, and responded, "I'm not obstructing. I'm standing up for justice. If you arrest me, this entire neighborhood will see it, and the world will know what you've done." Barnes, already visibly irritated, stepped closer to Shaq. "Don't think your fame gives you the right to do whatever you want. We don't care who you are. This is the law, and if you don't want to end up in a cell, I suggest you leave now." Shaq took a slow breath, steadying himself, his gaze unwavering. He bent down to ask Eleanor, "Are you all right? Are you hurt anywhere?" Eleanor shook her head, her eyes still red with tears, her voice trembling. "I didn't do anything. They just said I looked like someone and pushed me to the ground." Shaq turned back to Daniels and Barnes, his words sharp and deliberate, each one cutting through their arrogance like a blade. "You heard her. She hasn't done anything. Just because she's an elderly black woman sitting on a park bench, you think you have the right to handcuff her?" The crowd began murmuring louder. A young woman shouted, "Don't let them do this. This is racism." An older man nearby called out, "I've lived here for 30 years, and I've seen too much of this. It's time for it to stop." More people pulled out their phones, recording every word and action. Camera flashes lit up the scene, making Daniels and Barnes realize they were under intense scrutiny. A few voices rose above the noise. "Let her go," and "Shaq, we're with you." Barnes started to waver, glancing nervously at Daniels. "The crowd is recording," he muttered. "Maybe we should let her go." But Daniels shook his head, his jaw tight. "No, if we back down, they'll think we're weak. She's a suspect and we're just doing our job." Shaq stepped back slightly, facing Daniels directly, his fists clenched at his sides. He knew that one wrong move could escalate the situation, but he also knew he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He leaned down and spoke softly to Eleanor. "Don't worry, I won't let them hurt you anymore." Then he stood up, his gaze sharp as it locked onto Daniels. "You're not just damaging your own image. You're tarnishing the reputation of the entire police force. Everyone is watching. What you do today won't be forgotten." Daniels sneered. "Let them watch. I don't care. This is the law, and I'm enforcing it." Shaq's voice was calm but commanding, rising above the noise of the crowd. "The law is not a weapon for you to abuse. You represent justice, but all I see here is injustice and abuse of power. If you don't want your actions to be the headline on every news outlet tonight, I suggest you release her immediately." The crowd was no longer passive. A middle-aged man stepped forward, shouting, "He's right. They're targeting her because she's black. This isn't justice." An older woman nodded, adding, "Enough is enough. Let her go." Barnes looked increasingly uneasy. "Daniels, we can't keep handling it like this. This is escalating. We should call a supervisor." Daniels, his face stubborn and defiant, muttered through clenched teeth, "Call a supervisor? So they think we can't handle it? Not a chance." Shaq took another step closer, now only a short distance from Daniels. His deep, steady voice carried immense weight as he said, "If you won't do the right thing, let me make it clear. Everyone here is recording. Everyone here will testify. And I'm not leaving until she's free." Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the sound of a police siren echoed in the distance. A patrol car approached, its blue and red lights flashing. The crowd murmured louder, their voices filled with anticipation. "I think your little power trip is about to end," Shaq said, his voice low but resolute. The car pulled up, and an officer stepped out. It was Lieutenant Mark Anderson, the superior of Daniels and Barnes. The situation was about to reach its breaking point. The piercing sound of police sirens drowned out the murmurs of the crowd. A patrol car slowly rolled onto the scene, its blue and red lights reflecting off the pavement. The crowd parted slightly to make way, but their eyes remained fixed on Shaq, Eleanor, and the two officers. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The car door opened, and a middle-aged man stepped out. It was Lieutenant Mark Anderson, a veteran officer of the police force. With a stern expression and sharp eyes, Anderson walked over, immediately sensing the tension in the air. He glanced at Daniels and Barnes before turning his attention to Shaq, recognizing him immediately. "What's going on here?" Anderson asked, his voice calm yet commanding. Silence in the area for a moment. Daniels stepped forward, trying to maintain a professional demeanor. "Sir, we're handling a suspect. This man," he said, pointing at Shaq, "is obstructing our work and inciting the crowd." Shaq let out a faint, unimpressed smile, his gaze unwavering from Daniels. "Lieutenant, if you want to know what's happening, ask her," he said, gesturing toward Eleanor, who was still sitting on the ground, her face a mixture of fear and hope. Lieutenant Anderson approached Eleanor, crouching down to her level and speaking gently. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" Eleanor hesitated, but Shaq placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, giving her the courage to speak. "I was just sitting on the bench, resting after buying groceries. Then these two came over, said I looked like a suspect. They spilled my things, pushed me to the ground, and handcuffed me without explaining anything." Anderson's expression darkened. He turned to Daniels and Barnes, his tone direct. "Do you have any evidence? A clear identification or any legitimate reason to handcuff her?" Daniels stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "Sir, we were just following a description. She matches the suspect." "Matches?" Anderson interrupted, his voice sharp. "Matching is enough for you to rummage through her belongings, shove an elderly woman to the ground, and handcuff her? Did you even verify the information, or are you acting on assumptions?" The crowd erupted in cheers, some shouting, "They have no evidence," and "Let her go now." A few began booing Daniels and Barnes, making them look increasingly uncomfortable. Barnes leaned toward Daniels and whispered, "I told you, we shouldn't have done this." Shaq stepped forward, standing beside Lieutenant Anderson. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice calm but resolute, "I think it's time to do the right thing. She hasn't done anything wrong. What these two have done isn't just unjust. It's destroying the trust this community has in the force you lead." Anderson sighed, scanning the crowd that had grown larger. Phones were still held high, recording every moment, and all eyes were on him. He wasn't just handling an incident. He was making a decision that could define the reputation of the entire department. "Unlock her handcuffs immediately," Anderson ordered, his voice firm. Daniels started to protest, but Anderson's icy glare silenced him. Barnes awkwardly crouched down and fumbled to remove Eleanor's handcuffs. The crowd roared in approval, breaking into applause that rippled through the scene. Shaq bent down, helping Eleanor to her feet. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, not from fear this time, but from gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you," she whispered. Lieutenant Anderson turned to Daniels and Barnes, his voice cold. "You two, return to the station immediately. I'll deal with this later." The crowd began chanting for Shaq, with some shouting, "Shaq's a hero," and "Justice has been served." But Shaq raised a hand, signaling for quiet. He turned to Anderson, his expression serious. "Thank you for doing the right thing today. But this doesn't stop here. You know as well as I do that there are deeper problems in the system. I hope you'll take action, not just against these two, but to make real changes." Anderson stared at Shaq for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "I understand. We need to do better, and I'll make sure of it." Shaq guided Eleanor away from the scene, the crowd parting to let them through, their eyes filled with admiration. Under the streetlights, Shaq's towering figure seemed even more imposing, a symbol of courage and justice. But he knew this was just the beginning of a larger battle. Behind them, Lieutenant Anderson turned back to Daniels and Barnes, then pulled out his phone. "I need an emergency meeting about this incident," he said, his voice resolute. A wave of change was about to begin. As night fell, videos of the incident quickly went viral on social media. Hashtags like "Justice for Eleanor" and "Doc Stand with Shaq" began trending, accompanied by clips of Daniels and Barnes's actions. The footage of Shaq standing firm between Eleanor and the two officers, his piercing gaze and resolute words, became a symbol of courage. Public outrage surged, demanding transparency and justice. At the police station, Lieutenant Mark Anderson sat in his office, scrolling through a flood of angry comments on online posts. "This system is losing the people's trust," he thought. His desk phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was the police chief. "Mark, I've received dozens of calls from the media and even the mayor. This can't be swept under the rug. I need you to investigate and take action immediately." The chief's voice was urgent. "Yes, sir," Anderson replied. He knew this wasn't just about dealing with Daniels and Barnes. It was also a moment to confront deeper issues within the police force. The next day, the police department held a press conference. Lieutenant Anderson stood before a sea of cameras, his posture straight and determined. "We apologize to Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins and the community for the inappropriate actions of 2 officers in our department. They have been suspended and will be thoroughly investigated." The apology aired on television and spread widely on social media. But the community was not satisfied with just words. A local human rights group organized a small protest outside the police station, carrying signs that read, "Justice for Eleanor" and "End Police Abuse." Protesters demanded not only punishment for Daniels and Barnes, but also systemic reforms. Meanwhile, Shaq, though reluctant to be the center of attention, found himself swept into the public discourse. He appeared on a national television interview, his demeanor calm, but his voice carrying a powerful message as he recounted the incident. "I'm not a hero," Shaq said. "I just did what anyone should do. But the truth is, not everyone can stand up without fear. That's why change is necessary. No one, especially the vulnerable, should ever be treated the way Mrs. Eleanor was." His words resonated with millions of viewers, sparking a larger conversation about abuse of power and discrimination in law enforcement. The internal investigation, led by Lieutenant Anderson, moved swiftly. Videos of the incident, testimonies from Shaq, Eleanor, and eyewitnesses were collected. The findings confirmed misconduct by Daniels and Barnes in this case and revealed a troubling history. Both officers had prior complaints of excessive force, which had been overlooked. "We've uncovered major gaps in our internal oversight system," Anderson announced during a closed-door meeting with department leaders. These officers were shielded by silence and a lack of accountability. Under immense public pressure, the police department terminated Daniels and Barnes. Furthermore, the 2 faced criminal charges for excessive use of force and human rights violations. The police chief held another press conference, announcing comprehensive reforms. "We are committed to ensuring incidents like this never happen again. Starting today, we will implement ethics training, conflict resolution programs, and a more transparent complaint system," he declared. Eleanor, who had previously endured injustices in silence, became a voice for many. Speaking at a community gathering, her voice still slightly shaky but filled with resolve, she said, "I used to think I was just a little old lady with no voice. But Shaq stood up for me, and now I know I must not stay silent anymore. We all have a responsibility to fight for a fairer society." Shaq, seated in the front row, smiled with pride. He knew his actions that day had not only saved Eleanor but also sparked a larger movement, inspiring others to stand against injustice. As the spotlight on the incident gradually dimmed, Lieutenant Anderson sat in his office, looking out the window. He understood that his work didn't end with Daniels and Barnes. There was much more to be done to rebuild the community's trust in law enforcement. Elsewhere, Shaq continued attending community meetings, encouraging discussions on reform and justice. For him, this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reminder that anyone can make a difference if they have the courage to stand up. In the days following the incident, the story of Shaq and Eleanor continued to make waves across the media. Videos of the event went viral on social media, accompanied by hashtags like "Your Justice for Eleanor" and "You Stand with Shaq." becoming symbols of the fight for justice. The story spread far beyond the neighborhood, igniting a nationwide call for systemic change. At the police department, public outcry forced leadership to act. Lieutenant Mark Anderson, who had managed the situation on the ground, was tasked with leading a comprehensive reform effort. For him, this was not only a significant responsibility but also an opportunity to address the systemic flaws that had been exposed. In a press conference, Lieutenant Anderson announced that the department would implement extensive reforms to rebuild public trust. What happened was not merely the fault of Officers Daniels and Barnes, but a reflection of deeper systemic issues. "We are committed to ensuring this does not happen again," he declared. His statement was met with a mix of hope and skepticism. Reforms were swiftly put into action. The entire police force began mandatory training programs on professional ethics, nonviolent conflict resolution, and cultural awareness. These sessions emphasized that policing is not just about enforcing the law, but about protecting and serving the community. Shaq, leveraging his influence, was invited as a guest speaker for several sessions. He shared his story and highlighted the importance of respect and fairness in law enforcement. Additionally, a new complaint system was introduced, enabling citizens to report abuses of power without fear of retaliation. All complaints would be handled by an independent committee to ensure transparency and objectivity. The police department also organized regular community meetings to listen to feedback and discuss ways to improve relations between officers and residents. Shaq didn't stop at defending Eleanor. He used his platform to drive the reform movement forward. Speaking at a local school, he said, "I grew up in a neighborhood like this. I've seen too many people like Eleanor treated unjustly. But I've also learned that change doesn't come from silence. We have to speak up and take action." He became not only a speaker, but also a bridge between human rights organizations and local governments, mobilizing resources to support families affected by abuse of power and organizing workshops to educate communities about their rights. The story of Shaq and Eleanor inspired thousands across the country. Peaceful protests were held in numerous cities, carrying the message, "No place for abuse of power." Many victims of similar incidents began sharing their stories, creating a wave of advocacy for justice. Eleanor, once a silent victim, became a voice for many. At a community gathering, she spoke emotionally. "I used to think I was just a small, powerless old woman. But thanks to Shaq and the support of so many, I've realized that each of us has a voice and the power to bring change." Her words were met with thunderous applause, encouraging more people to join the movement. The reforms began to show results. Young officers participating in the new training programs demonstrated noticeable changes in their approach. In neighborhoods that once had strained relationships with the police, signs of positive engagement began to emerge. Meetings between officers and residents became spaces for dialogue, understanding, and breaking down stereotypes. Media outlets continued to report on the progress, and Shaq remained at the heart of the narrative. One major newspaper headline read, "Shaquille O'Neal, more than a basketball legend, a symbol of justice and unity." Despite this progress, Shaq understood that it was only the beginning. In a television interview, he said, "Change takes time, but if we don't start today, there will never be a better tomorrow. I can't do this alone, but I believe that together we can make a difference." With a determined look in his eyes, Shaq continued his journey, not only to champion justice but to inspire millions around the world. Small changes had started to take root, but the road to a fairer society remained long, requiring collective effort from everyone. In the days following the incident, the impact of Shaq and Eleanor's story extended far beyond the immediate changes. It became a symbol of justice and unity. What began as an event in a small neighborhood turned into a nationwide movement for change. Eleanor, once a quiet elderly woman resigned to injustice, became an inspiration for her community. In a televised interview, she shared her emotions. "At that moment, I thought I had no chance. But Shaq showed up, not just to protect me, but to give me hope that justice still exists. Now, I'm no longer afraid. I know that if we stand together, we can change anything." Eleanor didn't stop there. She began participating in community meetings, sharing her story to inspire others. At a crowded event, she stood before the audience and said, "We must not stay silent. I am proof that even the weakest among us can be protected if someone dares to stand up." Shaq continued his journey with unwavering commitment. He frequently appeared at workshops, schools, and community events, encouraging others to speak out against injustice. In a speech at a university, he said, "I'm not here to talk about what I've done. I'm here to remind you that every one of us has the power to create change. You don't have to be a hero. You just need to do what's right, even when it's hard." Shaq didn't stop at inspiring people. He supported human rights organizations, donated to funds aiding victims of violence and abuse of power, and participated in educational initiatives to help people better understand their rights. His efforts sparked change not just locally, but across the nation. At the local police department, reforms implemented under Lieutenant Anderson's leadership began to show results. Newly trained officers demonstrated a clear shift in approach. Neighborhoods that had long harbored strained relationships with law enforcement started seeing signs of improvement. Meetings between police and residents were no longer confrontational, but became opportunities to build trust and mutual understanding. The story didn't remain confined to one small area. Across the country, other cities began implementing similar initiatives. Communities that had endured police abuse of power began demanding greater transparency and accountability. A national movement took shape, carrying the message that every voice matters and justice is for everyone, not just the privileged few. The younger generation was deeply influenced by the story. In schools, the story of Shaq and Eleanor became a lesson on courage and social responsibility. A high school student wrote in an essay, "I used to think I couldn't change society, but Shaq's story showed me that sometimes all it takes is one brave person standing up to change the world." While positive changes had begun, Shaq understood the journey was far from over. In a television interview, he said, "Justice doesn't come naturally. We have to fight for it every day. What I did was just the first step. I hope people will continue to fight, not just for themselves, but for those without a voice." Eleanor now lives a more peaceful life, but she hasn't stopped. She continues to attend community meetings, standing alongside Shaq and others to send a powerful message. Justice is non-negotiable. At a community gathering, she took Shaq's hand and said, "You didn't just save me. You restored my faith in humanity." The story of Shaq and Eleanor is proof that the courage of one person can ignite change across an entire community. It serves as a reminder that no matter how difficult the circumstances, justice can prevail if we refuse to remain silent. With determined eyes, Shaq continues his path, knowing his journey is not just about defending justice but also inspiring millions worldwide. He believes that with courage and unity, a fairer world awaits. This story also sends a powerful message. Justice does not exist on its own. It must be protected, fought for, and upheld every day. In a world full of challenges and injustices, compassion and the unwavering resolve to stand for what is right are the guiding lights for all of us. Let this story remind us that every small action, every voice, and every courageous step contributes to building a more just society. And remember, change is never the task of one person. It is the responsibility of us all. If this story touched your heart, share it to spread this positive message to more people. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more meaningful, inspirational stories filled with humanity and values. Together, let's create a better world, starting with small actions today.